And welcome to SQL in the City, Seattle. Absolute pleasure to see you all here. And we're just going to give you a couple of tips for the morning.
Thank you, Annabelle. I'm sure most of you know Annabelle. This is the famous Annabelle. She's decked from head to toe in red. If any of you have any questions about today, she's probably the best person to talk to. But the rest of us can help as well. So if you do a quick twirl, Annabelle. Thank you. We rehearsed that. So on behalf of Annabelle and the rest of us at Redgate Software, thank you all for making the effort to come along here today to the Bell Harbour Conference Centre for a day that we're sure you're going to find enlightening, rewarding, and above all, enjoyable. It's fantastic that so many of you have actually made the effort to get down here on a Monday morning, and we really do appreciate it. This is the last leg of the SQL in the City Tour 2012, and it's delightful to have our finale event here in Seattle, which is a city that holds a special place in my heart and the hearts of many English people as the home of Frasier, Nirvana, we love Frasier, Nirvana, Starbucks, and of course SQL Pass. Comedy, grunge, and coffee. That's quite a legacy to give to the world. But that's enough about SQL Pass. So anyway, before we get underway, I just want to give you a few pointers to help you get the most out of your day. So your event agenda contains, Annabelle's lovely modelling it, contains all the details you'll need about the sessions that you can attend today. There are 3 parallel streams. This is the red room. There are 2 other rooms over there. But you can, of course, spend your time downstairs in the International Promenade lobby area if you'd rather spend your time talking to Redgate people instead, talking to our very friendly and highly trained Redgate staff, and they'll be more than happy to discuss our products and, of course, above all, hear your feedback. There's a full agenda of everything that's happening on the back, and there's a map as well, so in case you get lost. You can recognize the people here from Redgate, as I'm sure you've twigged already. We're all wearing these rather snazzy polo shirts. Not all of us will be carrying balloons all day, so do please stop us and ask us anything you like about the day itself, about our tools, and we'll do our best to answer all your questions. There are developers here, genuine, real software engineers. There are testers, there are support people, there are product managers, and we're all really looking forward to talking to you, to find out what you do all day, what the problems are that you've got, and above all, how Redgate can help you now and also into the future. You'll know when the sessions are about to start, because Annabelle will make this noise. The Redgate hooter. So that means that there's a session about to start. Breaks are all downstairs in the international lobby area. And don't worry, by the way, if there are 2 sessions that clash, that you want to see both, because the slides and videos of all the talks today will be made available by the end of this month, and you'll be sent a link. So you should be able to see everything eventually. So finally, please join us at 5, just after 5. So after the final session of the day, downstairs in the lobby area, there'll be a drink celebration. So please do come down and stay for that. That's it. Have an awesome day here at SQL in the City, Seattle. And would you please now join me in welcoming John Theron.
Morning. Thanks, Brian. How many of you here have ever had a problem deploying a database or an application? Anyone? I've been in software for about 20 years, being a developer, being a product manager, and still, when it gets to a deployment, when I'm about to kind of deploy some software, I get those butterflies in the bottom of my stomach. I get nervous about deploying. And to kind of highlight the complexities of deployment, we're going to play a game to kind of break the ice. So all of you people in front here, you guys are development, okay? The row at the back are production, okay? And what we got here is a bunch of balloons. The red balloons are database changes. And the white balloons are application changes. So what we're going to do is we're going to move these changes from development through test and staging to production. Okay? But what we're going to do is we're going to make it a bit realistic. So we're going to pretend you're not putting your database changes in source control. So therefore, you're going to close your eyes as you pass these changes backwards. And of course, we've got a time constraint. We're in a hurry. So we're going to try and do it in about a minute. You guys ready? Okay.
By the way, Austin is still #1 right now after 5 cities, so you guys have a chance.
Okay. So are you ready? Okay, go.
fast to take.
Come on. Okay, yay. Okay, so we've got a couple of changes to the back. Well done. I guess what that shows, and what we all know, is that in fact deploying database changes, deploying application changes is really difficult. This graph here shows how in fact, as we've started increasing the frequency of changes on the Redgate website, the number of mistakes we make has increased. And I guess there's really three things that are difficult about deploying applications and database changes. The first is it's really, really difficult to get them done on time. The second is it's really difficult to deploy those changes without ever breaking anything. And I guess the third thing, of course, is it takes a huge amount of effort to, in fact, move these changes from a dev to a test to a staging to a production environment. And that's kind of wasted effort because you're not adding value. You're just moving those changes backwards into the production environment. But in fact, if you look around the world, people are starting to deliver applications and database changes more and more frequently. So this here is Joel Spolsky, and he talks about the software production process having accumulation points, where in fact software sits that hasn't yet been delivered. And if you look around Redgate, we did a bit of an analysis. There's lots and lots of code in Redgate that has not yet been delivered. So code that's been tested but hasn't yet been shipped, code that's been developed but hasn't yet been tested. There's millions of worth of code sitting in Redgate we haven't managed to kind of get out of the door yet. And clearly that's pretty expensive. But there are a couple of other reasons, in fact, why people are trying to ship more frequently. I guess the first thing is if you ship frequently, you can ship small chunks of functionality. And because of that, what that really means is you can kind of minimize the impact, because rather than making this one big massive change, you're making lots of little changes. And you can therefore withstand the changes and kind of manage them more effectively. The second thing, of course, is you can become more agile and more responsive to your customers. Because imagine if you're shipping software once a year, and someone says to you, hey, John, I'd like to add a new feature. Well, what can you do? You say, well, 2013 or 2014 will do that for you. But if you're shipping every week or every 2 weeks, you can certainly kind of factor that into your schedule. So you can become more responsive to your customers. The third thing is that the software developers themselves love it. And you might think, why? Why on earth would software developers like to deliver more frequently? But the reality is if you're a software developer and you're sitting there and you've done your best and you've coded, and only a year later a customer gets to see it, you kind of feel a bit isolated. But if you're shipping software frequently or making your changes frequently and getting that feedback, you're much more connected to the real world. So it's kind of important for the software developers to get that feedback and be in that kind of release process. And then finally, of course, and somewhat paradoxically, the more you deliver, the better you get at it. So in fact, as you start taking this pain and delivering more frequently, it becomes easier because you know how to do it, and you've got lots of practice in doing it. And I guess the thing that we think about in Redgate is that this change is happening more and more frequently to more and more companies. So right now, we're seeing the kind of beginning of the storm. But in the future, we really think that most companies are going to be delivering software more and more frequently. Anyone here use SQL Compare version 1.0? Quite a few. That's pretty impressive. So SQL Compare 1.0 was a very simple tool that allowed you to look at two different databases and see what the differences were. And it was great because really what you could then do is kind of understand the differences between, for example, a dev and a test environment. And that was released back in about 2002, 2001, so more than 10 years ago. And then we said to ourselves, wouldn't it be nice if we could, in fact, not only show the differences between those two databases, but generate the script to make them the same. So we kind of introduced this concept of sync and compare, or comparison and synchronization. And then we said, but a lot of applications have got reference data that they rely upon. So why don't we, in fact, introduce a tool called Data Compare to compare the data between these two databases so we can make the data the same. And then over the years, we introduced a number of other tools to, in fact, start helping this process of pushing changes from dev to test to production. So there was a tool called Dependency Tracker. And what Dependency Tracker did is allowed you to kind of look at what changes or how your changes might impact the rest of your database. And a tool called SQL Doc, which allows you to document your databases. And a tool called Data Generator that helps you kind of generate data in your dev and test environments so you can, in fact, do some representative testing. And then a couple of years ago, we kind of, I think, changed the landscape a bit by introducing a tool called SQL Source Control. And what SQL Source Control allows you to do is to take your schema and your stored procedures, your database, and put that into your source control system. So if you're using Subversion or if you're using Git or Mercurial or whatever you're using, you can, in fact, put that database into that source control system. And that's great because now you can track changes, you can maintain access control, you can roll back if you need to. So suddenly you can treat databases in the same way as you treat your applications. And for the first time, the database is not kind of a second-class citizen. It's really the same kind of thing as your application code. And you can start thinking of it as you think of your application code. Now, of course, the challenge is that it doesn't really make sense to deploy a database in isolation, does it? Or an application in isolation. Because what you, in fact, need to do is to deploy the application and the database together. So the next thing we said is, why don't we start working on a way to, in fact, deploy the application and the database together? And so we introduced, and in fact, this was released on Thursday, last Thursday, a tool called Deployment Manager. And what Deployment Manager allows you to do is to, in fact, deploy both the database and the application changes. So to demonstrate that, I'd like to introduce Michael Upton. Michael's a developer on the Deployment Manager team, and he's going to do a bit of a demo of Deployment Manager.
Cool, thanks, John. So I want to start by asking the question, why did we start working on this tool? And the answer is feedback from you guys, really, feedback from our customers saying that deployment is painful. And the reason it's painful is because it's a complicated process. It can be time-consuming. Manual deployments can be really time-consuming. There's often lots of steps you have to go through to get that deployment working, which means it's easy to make a mistake at any point in that. Because of that risk of mistakes and the amount of time it takes, you find yourself having to come in out of hours, early in the morning, late at night, so that you're reducing customer downtime. And often that's a single person who's having to do that as well. So sole point of failure. So it's very stressful for them. It's a huge responsibility. And if that person is off sick or even leaves the company, then all of that knowledge is gone. And the other bit of feedback we've had is that it's sometimes difficult to even know which version of your software is where. If you have 50 customers, 100 customers, multiple sites, how do you know exactly which version you've got and where you've got it and keep track of that? So Deployment Manager is our solution to this headache. It's a tool to automate the release process. And what you see here is a screenshot of the dashboard in the web portal. If I zoom in a bit so you can see the detail here. Across the top, we have some environments, development, test, staging, production. And down the side, you see the projects we're working on. So in the middle is this representation of which versions of those projects are in which environments. So it's a tool to help you visualize the versions you've deployed, but also to help you deploy them. It's not just for deploying the SQL Server database, but the whole application, web applications, ASP.NET, Windows services, anything else you need to deploy, you can deploy using Deployment Manager. It's designed to make that deployment easy. So to demonstrate it, I'd like to show you the Exceptional DBA Awards website. It's an annual event that we sponsor to recognize the efforts and achievements of great DBAs, some of you guys in this room. And it's also a great example for our demo because it has an ASP.NET website as the front end and it has a SQL Server database backend. So if we look at the current state of that website in production, you can see Meredith Ryan here, our Exceptional DBA. And here is a live Deployment Manager dashboard, should be the dashboard, of the two environments that we've got set up here. So just production and testing. You can see that version 1.0 is in production and version 1.1 has gone to testing. So if QA have told us that this is okay, we can deploy this to production just by clicking on the version here, clicking the Deploy To button, choosing the production environment, and hitting Deploy Release. While that's going on, I'm going to show you an animation that describes in more detail what it's doing.
So we started the deployment from the Deployment Manager server, which pulls components of your application from a package repository. Various components are represented as packages. In this case, we've just got the database schema and the web application. So when you create a release, the Deployment Manager pulls the latest versions of those packages, packages them up, and then sends them securely to whatever environment you choose, be that testing, staging, production, any environments that you've got configured. In this case, we've chosen production, and it gets sent to the server, unpacked on the server, or multiple servers, and deployed to update SQL Server, update IIS, any other updates you need to do. So that's what's been going on while we've been looking at the animation. You can see that it's all completed here, and if we refresh the live website. Now that's not the face I was expecting to see there. It looks like some soon-to-be ex-Redgate employee has been making a few changes to our website. I think we're going to need to roll that one back. And fortunately, Deployment Manager makes that easy too. We find the previous version, deploy that to production, follow exactly the same steps we followed before. So it downloads the previous version's packages from the repository, and then it will upload them to the target server and update SQL Server, redirect IIS to point the site in the right place again. And if we go back to the live site, refresh one more time, we're back to the way we should be.
That's a relief.
Cool. So if you're interested in finding out more about Deployment Manager, you can, as John said, we released it on Thursday, so you can download a free 28-day trial version. That's from www.redgate.com/dm. There's also a deployment session later in the afternoon with much more technical detail about how all of this works. That's 5+4 in the grey room, and that's with Alan White and myself. If you're watching this keynote online, or if you're going to another thing, you can watch that session online as well. That will be ready by the end of November. And alternatively, you can find me or one of my lovely colleagues over here, and we can give you a demonstration between the sessions as well. There's Deployment Manager set up live on all of the demo machines. Thank you all, and back to you, John.
Thanks. I guess my reign as an exceptional DBA was short-lived. But so anyway, I guess the point we're trying to make is that Redgate's been in this business of trying to help people deploy databases and applications for a long time, primarily with SQL Server and with ASP.NET applications so far. But as we look into the future, we're working on a source control for Oracle application. So you'll be able to deploy Oracle databases in the same way as you can SQL Server databases. We've got a free SQL Server analysis services compare tool, so you can compare two cubes and see the differences and in fact make them the same. And we're going to, over time, kind of increase our focus on delivery as a theme and start supporting the delivery of other application stacks and other databases. So kind of clearly a kind of focus for Redgate as a delivery and a deployment type company. You know, we live in a world these days where there's kind of an expectation that you know everything about anything that ever happens as soon as it happens. So for example, if I wanted to find out about what's happening in Seattle tonight, I could go and look on Google, and I can go and look on the web. If I want to find out what my friends are doing, I can look on Facebook, or I can look on Twitter. This here is an example. It's a Google Analytics page, and it really shows the traffic to the SQL in the city website just before this event. And I didn't know that this was going to be up there, but as I was kind of preparing for the event and thinking about what the event was going to be about, I kind of looked at Google Analytics, and I found this page, so I could find out exactly who was looking at our website, who was going to be coming, how many people might in fact attend. And I expected that. I really expected that if I wanted to get that information, I could get it. And I'd been upset with my marketing department if in fact I couldn't have found that information. So there's this kind of expectation that what I need to find out, I can find out. But the reality is that's not quite so simple for databases and for applications. Who here has ever found out about an application problem or a database problem from a customer? Anyone? And that's kind of embarrassing, isn't it? So kind of what we'd like to do is get better insight and more insight into our databases and applications. And so one of the things that Redgate does is we start, in fact, trying to provide that insight to developers about their databases and applications. And what we believe, in fact, is that it's important to get the insight as soon as you can. So if you can get that insight in development, then you should get it. But quite often, of course, problems only manifest themselves in production, so you've got to kind of wait till production. But you need tools that can help you both in development and production. So the first tool, in fact, that we had, which was kind of an insight tool, was a tool called Ant's Performance Profiler. And what that tool really did was allow you to take a look at .NET code and understand which parts of that code, which lines of the code were in fact operating slowly. That was great because you could kind of understand the bottlenecks and eliminate those bottlenecks. And then over time, we introduced a tool called Ant's Memory Profiler, which allows you to kind of understand how your code or how your application is managing memory. And we also, in fact, have got a tool called .NET Reflector that helps you to debug third-party code. So kind of this ability to understand what your ASP.NET code is doing. And on the monitoring side of things, on the database side of things, we've got a tool called SQL Monitor. And SQL Monitor really is a real-time monitoring and alerting tool for your SQL servers that allows you to kind of understand how those servers are behaving anywhere, anytime. One of the things we've done with SQL Monitor recently is we released a version called SQL Monitor version 3.2, and that introduces a concept of custom metrics. So what that allows you to do is to write a T-SQL query and use the results of that for monitoring and alerting. So you can really create the metrics you need. So if a tool doesn't have some kind of a metric, you can create your own. And there's in fact, a page on our website where you can upload your metrics, you can share metrics, you can download metrics that in fact have been written by MVPs and some of the Redgate people. So there's kind of an ability to create that custom metric of your own to address that specific need. And in fact, in Redgate, one of the things we're doing is using those custom metrics to monitor our business. So things like support calls and support queues we can look at by writing a query, we can look in SQL Monitor. So kind of powerful. The other thing we do on the monitoring side of things is we've got a project called Hosted Monitor. And what Hosted Monitor allows you to do is, in fact, monitor your on-premises SQL Server in the cloud. So rather than configuring a monitoring server and worrying about the infrastructure, you can simply monitor that server, but the monitoring server and the monitoring infrastructure is sitting in the cloud. So if you'd like to find out more about monitoring and what we're doing on the monitoring thing, in fact, directly after this session, there's a talk called The Future of Monitoring. And in fact, David Bick and a couple of the monitoring guys are here. So go and find them and chat to them about monitoring and what's happening with monitoring. One of the things that's always been true about kind of getting insight into stuff is it's quite difficult to decide where in the stack a problem is. So quite often we've had problems where the database guys are saying, no, it's the developers that caused the trouble, and the developer guys are saying, no, it's the database guys, and there's kind of this finger pointing. And in fact, one of the things we've done with the latest version of Ant's Performance Profiler is introduce functionality that allows you to look at your code and at your database queries and understand which part of that is taking the longest. So you can, in fact, see how long your database query is taking. You can see how long each line of code is taking. And you can really cut to the chase and say, hey, this is the problem. This is the thing that's causing the slowness. And so, of course, you stop the finger pointing, and you allow people to really kind of get to solving the problem. And that's important. So to talk about that, and in fact to talk as well about a new open source project that Redgate's supporting called Glimpse, I'd like to show you a video from one of our developers on the Glimpse team, a gentleman called Nick Molnar.
Redgate has lots of great tools to help developers get insights into their running code. So for example, we have Ant's Performance Profiler, which will show an application as it's running, how much CPU is being spent as code executes, as well as calls to the database and how long those are taking, and other things such as file I/O access. Ant's Performance Profiler does something that most other profilers don't do. It actually instruments into any data access calls that an application is making. So as a peer to regular .NET code running is the calls to the database, and it will show you the query that was made, how long it took for that query to be made, and how many times the query might have been made. This is really helpful for an application developer or for a DBA because they can see exactly where bottlenecks in the code are, whether it's on the database side, it's on the application client side, or somewhere in between. We also have a tool that we're now supporting called Glimpse. Glimpse is an open source tool that is being supported by Redgate that provides diagnostics information to web developers as they develop their application. So Glimpse is very similar to other web development tools that web developers use, such as Firebug or the F12 developer tools built into their browser of choice, But what Glimpse does differently is instead of showing client-side concerns, such as CSS or JavaScript, it shows server-side concerns, such as how your routing is configured or what view engines are being executed on any given response. So Glimpse is really easy to get started with. You can just simply add it to your project with a couple of clicks of the mouse and start running your application. Once your application is running, you'll notice the little square Glimpse icon in the lower right-hand corner of your website, and you can open that up. From there, there's a bunch of different tabs that will give you information about what's happening in your application. The timeline tab shows you information about how long different parts of your application took to execute, and will show you some light performance profiling information. The Ajax tab will show you asynchronous Ajax calls that your application is making and allow you to launch and inspect what happened on the server side in each of those responses. So the Routes tab will show you the routes that you have configured in your ASP.NET application, so you understand what URLs your users request and how they map back to a page or a method in your code. Glimpse will also show you information about the environment in which the response was made. You find out the server, things like its time zone, as well as what's in its web config file and the server that actually made the response.
So there was Nick. And in fact, if you would like to find out more about Glimpse, just tweet with the hashtag Glimpse. And Nick will be sure to get back to you and talk to you about Glimpse and answer your questions. All of you are aware, I'm sure, that Great Britain hosted the Olympics this summer. And this is a picture of the Jamaican relay team with Usain Bolt just about to hurtle off to victory. But what you can't see is Team GB, the Great Britain team. And in fact, what was happening is a couple of seconds behind these guys, the Great Britain team was kind of fumbling the baton change. So they'd been training for 10 years. They weren't going to beat Jamaica, but they could have come second or third or something like that. But they'd actually managed to fumble the change and they got disqualified. And the reality there is they didn't take care of the basics. And I guess the challenge for DBAs is you need to take care of the basics. You need to make sure that data is there all of the time, every time. And you can't actually do that fumble. You can't afford to not take care of the basics. So one of the things Redgate does is we look at tools really that help you pay attention to those basics. So for example, with SQL Backup version 7, the Pro version, we've got this concept of automated verification. So once you've backed up your database, we'll automatically verify that database and make sure that it can be restored. So that when you in fact need that restoration, when you need to restore that database, you can kind of rest assured that it will be able to restore. It's going the wrong way, isn't it? The other thing we're doing, in fact, on the data management side of things is we've got a concept called cloud backup. So what we're doing is allowing you to use your existing SQL Backup UI, but back up your data to the cloud as opposed to your infrastructure or tape or stuff like that. And what that really does is kind of remove the hassle of managing that infrastructure of services and tape and goodness knows what. So what you're doing is you're taking that data, putting it into the cloud. So for disaster recovery purposes and BCP purposes, it's kind of off-site. And then when you need to, you can restore that data back from the cloud onto your on-premises SQL Server. The other thing we're focusing on with data management is ensuring that you can, in fact, have data that's representative in your test and your development environments. So a bunch of tools to help you create data in those environments, scrub that data, and have representative data for use as you're testing and developing your applications. And of course, what we're also trying to focus on is making sure that you can maintain that data integrity and keep that data safe in the face of these faster and faster and more frequent deployments. So in summary, what are we focused on in Redgate? I guess the first thing is we focused on helping you to deliver in a predictable and reliable manner as companies start, in fact, trying to deliver more and more frequently. The second thing we're focusing on is trying to provide insight into your applications and databases, both in development and production, as these applications become more and more complex. And the third thing we're trying to do is make sure that you can protect that data and keep that data safe in the face of this increasing change and in the face of this increasing complexity. So really, this is the 8th SQL in the City event. So we did 2 in London. This is the 6th one in America. It's been kind of a long and hard slog. But the feedback we've got is that it's a fun event and that people think it's a friendly event. So please have fun. Talk to the MVPs, talk to the Redgaters, talk to each other, share experiences, And have a great day, people. Thanks.